it works with different assets and different things like that. But once again, the main thing I want your listeners to take away from this is Bitcoin is really a vehicle and an avenue to preserve your purchasing power over both medium and long periods of time. Bitcoin is moving at an adoption rate faster than the internet, much faster. But we're still in like 1995, 96. Like you said, everybody's kind of heard of it. No one really knows what it is yet. You know, we're at like 1.5%, 2% global adoption. But what else is happening, Scott? You know, it's hard to know what material costs are going to be at the time that you're starting these projects if they're way down the road. I would immediately put a portion of that into Bitcoin as just it's basically an insurance policy at that point. You're looking at it as a hedge, once again, against that inflation. And you say, well, what if I get there and these material prices haven't changed whatsoever? Well, you're probably not going to be any worse off. Now, at the same time, what I do not recommend is for everybody to just immediately go put every dollar that they have into Bitcoin. This is a volatile asset, and people always get afraid of the volatility of this. But volatility really is something that's very special in this asset once you understand what it is and how it works. But to kind of numb that down, if you have even a 2 to 4 year time horizon, there is nothing that I think a contracting company could put their extra economic energy into that would benefit them more from a purchasing power standpoint than Bitcoin would.
Welcome, everybody, to the next episode of the Construction MF'ers podcast. I am 𝗗𝗲𝗺𝗊𝗶𝗺, CEO and founder of Mobilization Funding, and today we are going to go a little bit off of our normal script, and we're going to stick with construction, we're going to stick with business, but we're going to talk about ways to enhance your balance sheet, smarter contracting, smarter types of contracts, and the technology in and around Bitcoin and blockchain, and how a real estate entrepreneur has shifted their focus from investing in real estate, selling properties, holding properties, working directly with construction companies, to starting their own Bitcoin consulting company, working directly with construction companies and showing them how to utilize this new financing tool and the way this technology is developing so that you can better run your business. Eric Moorman, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm
Yeah,
thrilled to be here.
Yeah. So tell us about how you could go from a real estate investor in Illinois to all of a sudden, I'm going to make this shift. And everybody that's been on the planet Earth for the last 8 years has certainly heard about Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many people have invested in Bitcoin personally or corporately, or even would understand, how can I use this new technology, this financing, this Bitcoin and all the technology that's been built around it to actually enhance their construction company. Mm-hmm. But I'd love to get a little background on maybe you can touch on that and then just kind of get from why you would go from real estate into your new venture.
For sure. Well, once again, thank you for having me. Thrilled to be here. And my background, in 2008, I started a real estate investment company literally in my parents' basement. I had no money, but I had a dream that I could do this using creative financing techniques. And the first year we started, we did 10 properties. And the second year, we would buy and sell 20 properties. Then we eventually got it to 40 properties a year using a variety of financing techniques, from creative financing options, subject tos, to bank financing, to private lenders. And we were focused on a variety of kinds of deals. We were doing single-family homes. We did land development deals. We built new construction. We did some commercial stuff. But everything was always centered around the financing and how would it affect our balance sheet and our P&L. So fast forward a little bit. In 2019, I had a really close friend who I really respected, who did not come from a finance background. And he came to me and he said, I know you're really into money and finance, and I think you should check this thing out. And I'd heard of Bitcoin for several years and blown it off. I had no interest. I had my real estate investment business going. It was rocking, and I felt like I had no reason to look into this thing.
This is 2019, you said?
This is 2019.
2019, okay.
Yep. The first time I heard about it was around 2014 and 15, and I could have cared less.
You're 11 years into the real estate business, and now you're going to be talking to somebody for the first time really about Bitcoin. Okay, cool.
Yep. And so it literally took him nearly a year of just staying on me and nagging me about Eric, you need to look into us. And he would push the price. That was kind of his thing. Like, look, it's done this to this and this to this. And when COVID happened and we all had a lot more time on our hands, I thought, I'm going to look into this thing because I'm hearing more about it. I'm seeing it out there more. And I wanted to understand what it was. Was it a Ponzi scheme, or was it something that could really change the way I viewed money and finance? And after 10 hours of doing that, I finally started to kind of wrap my head around the concepts of what this was doing. And after 100 hours of studying it, going down this, what they called the Bitcoin rabbit hole, I purchased my first allocation of Bitcoin. And after 1,000 hours of studying it, it had completely changed my life, and I sold 90% of my real estate investment company and knew I would be working in and around Bitcoin for the rest of my life. And so my main goal now is to help each one person at a time, help as many people as possible understand what this thing is, how it can help them both personally and corporately, and more so, why right now we are going through changes in money, finance, and culture in general, and why Bitcoin is strategically positioned to take us to the next level in humanity, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's cool. I mean, I've read a lot about Bitcoin. Similar to you, I heard about it. I remember having friends talk about it. I even sat on a call with like 4 or 5 buddies, probably in, it was sadly probably 2015. And you see me smiling because I think at the time it might have been like measured in cents, right? And it was going to be like, somebody mentioned Bitcoin. His classic friend that always does, his name's Chris Dunn. He's hysterical. Always on the front end of something. Usually he's out in front of it, and usually somehow we all jumped on or didn't, and Chris stays on it, and it evolves. But we were all like, I don't really know. And of course, at the time, it wasn't like a way to go just acquire it. You had to sort of like, I don't even remember how we were going to get it, but it sounded shady at the best, right? And come to find out, it would have been obviously amazing if we did that. Assuming we held it properly, did what we needed to do, because obviously by 2017 it was up. I can't even remember what it had gone to, but it created a lot of wealth for a lot of folks, just even moving from multiple cents. And then I met a guy at an entrepreneurial event in 2019 who had a brother or a cousin who was autistic and focused a lot on Bitcoin and knew all about it.
Wow.
And he had just retired from the NFL, and he had a shorter career there, and his cousin had came to him, and I might be sort of paraphrasing and missing the story, but his cousin came to him and said, look, man, you got to look into this. And he was very, he was highly functioning autistic, but like brilliant. And he was telling him all about it. He didn't understand it, but he had just got a nice contract, so he had $10,000, and he bought $10,000 worth of Bitcoin at like 7.5 cents.
Wow!
And he sold it in the 2017 run. I don't remember what it was, but it was clearly worth like $22 or $23 million. What he said. So I can't remember exactly the price, but it was a lot. He showed me the piece of paper that he had acquired the Bitcoin. It was literally a piece of paper, and it had like these codes on it, and I don't even know if it was multiple codes, but it was like just a code. And I don't know if that would be like hash or what that was at the point, but it was the code. And so let's say this was 2014, 15, he probably bought these. He threw them in his safe, didn't think anything else of it, sort of appeased his nephew, cousin, I can't remember who his relative was. But come to find out, it's now on the news, and it's in that first wave, and it's on the news, and he's like, my God, man, my cousin was telling me about this. He calls his cousin, he's like, is this thing in my safe? He's digging in his safe, he finds a piece of paper, he calls him up, and he goes, yeah, you kept them, oh, good for you, that's great. You could sell them. He's like, are these things really worth 23? He goes, yeah. So why didn't you tell me? He's like, I thought you already knew. I told you they were going to be great. It's like, so it's just a casual conversation. Like it was like, what flavor water do you like, or juice?
I wish I had that cousin.
Yeah, and so and also to take it, $10,000 is not a small chump change. Just to put it on somebody understands. Good for him, and he's done amazing things since then. Great entrepreneur, got into real estate, got into development. He's done a lot of very, very good things with his money, both with his family and his businesses. But that was my first inkling of it. at the same time, I did nothing. And then I went back and I saw the story of what I could have done. And so when COVID came, I read a lot about it too. Like your same point, had a lot of time. I found a few people that I really like to listen to and acquired and bought a few Bitcoin and have really just held on to them. But what I'm curious about for you is what made you in those 1,000 hours decide, okay, no more real estate, which, you know, you're in one of the greatest real estate environments. And at the time, honestly, if you stopped doing it in 2020, you had another 2 good years probably, right? And then shifted into Bitcoin and then shifted into the consulting for Bitcoin for businesses. That is really fascinating. I think folks on the other end listening to this are like, okay, cool. We all heard the Bitcoin story, but now tell me how this thing can be impactful to my business. And then maybe we'll rewind and what you learned and why that is. But let's tell them why.
For sure. Well, what I want to start everyone thinking about, think about what all we sacrifice for money. Our time, certainly, our relationships, our health, sometimes our morals. A huge part of the human experience we are willing to sacrifice for money. Now, I want you to also think about how few of us truly understand what money is, how does it work, how has it changed over time, okay? So that's kind of the foundation of all of this. And what I found so fascinating was we are willing to give up so much of our time, energy, effort for this thing, but we don't really understand what it is. And Scott, as you know, those who understand how money works, it will either work for you or you will work for it.
Correct.
It's a very big difference.
That's a really key fact. I think people need to know. You're either understanding money and letting it work for you, or you are working for it and you don't understand that you are.
That is 100% correct.
I agree with you on that.
And what I found through those 100 hours of study, and I'm going to make this very simplistic because you can't really truly understand this thing in a podcast, but Bitcoin truly is the cheat code that we are living in right now to be able to take either your personal balance sheet or your business to the next level. What do I mean by that? Take another step back. The monetary system we have right now is based on debt. It's a Keynesian economic system, and it requires debt to breathe. It requires debt and the expansion of money. Bitcoin, on the other hand, is what's called an Austrian economic system, and it is focused on scarcity of money. Technology is deflationary by its very nature. So what we've all kind of agreed to is that the Federal Reserve has a 2-part mandate. They want low unemployment and a 2% inflation. So we've all kind of agreed that 2% theft of our time and money is kind of an okay thing, okay? Well, why does it have to be that way? And what you find in those 1,000 hours of study, it doesn't have to be that way. And Bitcoin as a deflationary currency is going to fight against all of the tailwinds that we have right now in our businesses and personal lives. So I think we would all agree over the last 4 to 5 years, everything has gone up drastically in price. It's hard to find signal out in the market. We all live and breathe by what the Federal Reserve is going to do. Are they going to cut rates? What is the Fed funds rate going to be? What's it going to cost me to borrow money? Okay? And when you start to look at this through the idea of a monetary system, you know exactly what it's going to do from now through the year 2140, you start to understand, do I have to just participate in this economy that is based on a money system that is going to be forever expanding, and what could it do for me if I started to take just a part of that and put it into a monetary system with a fixed supply? And so what I would recommend all of your users to do, obviously do your research, but understand, what are the problems we're trying to solve here? Well, for me and most of the clients and people I work with, it is preserving their purchasing power over time. You know, Bitcoin is not an asset that I recommend that you trade. You don't buy it. What your friend did, they bought it, they kind of forgot about it, put it away, and woke up and it was worth $22 million. That happens to everyone who buys it, forgets about it, and over a long period of time it's going to appreciate. So how does that happen? Well, unlike the Keynesian economic system that requires debt and constant monetary expansion, Bitcoin's issuance rate cuts in half every 4 years. There will never be more than 21 million Bitcoin. So the earlier you purchase your Bitcoin and hold on to it, the more purchasing power you will have over time. Right. And we could get into the discussion about how it works with different assets and different things like that. But once again, the main thing I want your listeners to take away from this is Bitcoin is really a vehicle and an avenue to preserve your purchasing power over both medium and long periods of time.
Yeah, I think that's a great delineation too, because people think, oh, my money is appreciating.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if I'm understanding you correctly, to use round numbers, you let's say you have $100,000
Mm-hmm.
and you put $100,000 into a bank account and you don't touch it.
Yep.
Today is, June 24 as we're recording this, okay? And you can buy so many things in June of 2024 with $100,000. In June of 2034, can you buy those same exact things with $100,000?
That's a great point.
Probably not.
Absolutely not.
And in June of 2034, are you able to take that 100, even if that 100 grand now becomes 150 grand, can you have 150 grand, you're like, oh, it went up 50%. But what if you can still, with the 150 grand, only buy the same things you could have bought with 100 grand?
Exactly.
And if that is the case, and we've all seen hyperinflation in the last 4 years, forget the reasons why. Well,
sure.
That's a whole nother podcast.
That's right.
But no matter what, I don't think anyone disagrees that things are more expensive, right? Just to move stuff, to buy stuff, a grocery store, whatever. And so if what you're saying is if you were to take $50,000 of your 100, and I'm making this as simple as I can, and put it in that same bank account, and you took 50,000 of it and put it in Bitcoin, as your 50,000 appreciated to 60 maybe over that 10-year period, or 70, and that 70 now only bought you the same amount of things as 50 did, you now have this Bitcoin that's gone up in an astronomical way, or in some kind of other forced way, which would be deflationary instead of inflationary, and that surplus would give you what otherwise would have been a neutral playing field or better.
That is spot on. So let's look at it a little bit of a different way. We've got $100,000. What could we do with it? You could do a lot. You could keep that as cash in your bank account. You could buy the S&P index. You could buy bonds. You could buy real estate. They all have a different part in your portfolio. And I'm not saying anything negative against those other things, but I want you to think about something too in relation to those assets. When COVID happened, if you'll remember, what did the markets do and what happened to asset prices? Well, we had a huge spike down when it first came out, and then when all the stimulus checks started coming out, the markets were setting records. Asset prices went crazy. So ask yourself once again, did the value of those equities and securities and real estate, did it really increase that much? Or did the other set of that asset pair, that trade on the other end, was it losing value? And so what we're really talking about here is, what are we going to put our economic energy in? Are we going to put it into something that is going to outpace the inflationary rate? Well, hopefully yes. And what does that? Scarce desirable assets. That can be real estate, that can be land, that can be securities. I certainly don't think it can be bonds, but there is nothing more scarce and what is now coming up as desirable globally as an asset than Bitcoin. And what I really want people to understand too, the opportunity that we have, Bitcoin is moving at an adoption rate faster than the internet, much faster. But we're still in like 1995, 96. Like you said, everybody's kind of heard of it. No one really knows what it is yet. We're at like 1.5%, 2% global adoption. But what else is happening, Scott? Well, when I would talk to people 3 years ago, go on podcasts, they would ask me the question, is this a fad? Like, is the government going to ban this? Well, now you have the biggest money managers on earth coming out and supporting this thing with these ETFs. We've made it easy. We've now securitized this thing to where it's much easier for everybody to buy in their brokerage account. The Bitcoin ETF via BlackRock IBIT is the most successful ETF in history. You have countries that have made this thing legal tender. You now have 2 presidential candidates that are making it a huge issue in their agenda for this campaign this year. That kind of shocked the entire Bitcoin community. So as we're coming up and as this thing is just now being born. That's the other reason. We have an opportunity right now, unlike really anything else in human history. This will be the new global base layer of money. So how do you know that, Eric? Well, think about what all we're digitizing and what we have digitized. We've digitized photographs. We don't take pictures. Kodak doesn't exist anymore. We've digitized music, and now we are digitizing money. And so to think that we would ever go back to the old system, the thing I always say, how many young people these days do you know that even have a checkbook?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Do you think we're really these kids live on their phones? We all live our lives on our phones. I literally bought a Tesla on my telephone, right? So we all live in this digital world, and the toothpaste is out of the tube. We're not going to go back from that.
So I'm in construction. I own a contracting business. I've seen inflation in my material costs.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen it hurt me on projects because I bid the project several months ago, and I thought I'd put enough in it, but it actually ran away from me even in the short money months. Then there's folks who bid projects, material and labor.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's contract labor. 6 months or 7 months ago, now that project got delayed, then the project's about to start, and they're signed, sealed, and delivered, and they're upside down. So how could Bitcoin or any of these other technologies around it help them in a construction world where you have this inflationary business environment where material costs, labor costs, just cost to do anything, your gas, your fuel, all of it's impacting these businesses the same way. How could you utilize Bitcoin to help you in the same way?
Absolutely.
Understand it personally, but in a business sense, how could you do it?
Mm-hmm. Let's look at it just from a contracting company. We'll look at it in both short term and long term. If I'm working with a construction company, what I am recommending to them, and once again, do your research, and this is based on a variety of factors. There is no one size fits all, but start to have some of your savings in Bitcoin. Start 5%, 10%, whatever you would be comfortable with for the long term in general. And if you can start to have some of your savings in that, regardless of what even short-term projects you have, that is going to counterbalance a lot of those inflationary pressures. Now let's look at something more short-term. Like you said, I've signed this contract. Maybe it's a year-long project. I may have got some money up front to start the project, but by the time I get there, it's hard to know what material costs are going to be at the time that you're starting these projects if they're way down the road. I would immediately put a portion of that into Bitcoin as it's basically an insurance policy at that point. You're looking at it as a hedge, once again, against that inflation. And you say, well, what if I get there and these material prices haven't changed whatsoever? Well, you're probably not going to be any worse off. Now, at the same time, what I do not recommend is for everybody to just immediately go put every dollar that they have into Bitcoin. This is a volatile asset, and people always get afraid of the volatility of this. But volatility really is something that's very special in this asset once you understand what it is and how it works. But to kind of numb that down, if you have even a 2 to 4 year time horizon, there is nothing that I think a contracting company could put their extra economic energy into that would benefit them more from a purchasing power standpoint than Bitcoin would.
So let me ask you this question then.
Please.
If I'm a contractor, I'm managing my books out of my checking account. I get my financials done maybe at the end of the year, only if someone asks, maybe once a quarter.
Shoebox style?
Maybe not shoebox style, but I have my account and just everything runs through that account. And even some of my personal items might run through there. But nonetheless, I have debit cards and everything just runs through there. So I'm running my business through my bank account. Not necessarily book balances, my checks go in there. I have a separate payroll account, but I kind of look at my accountant as helping me fill my taxes out at the end of the year. And I only run financials if the bank asks for them, if I'm trying to get a bank loan, or if I try to get an SBA loan. And then in that case, I have to take my bank statements and then go to the account. Can any of what we're talking about really help that person?
Absolutely.
Okay.
You do not need a degree in finance to understand how to hold this thing and to have it work for you. I mean, it really can be a simplistic. I'm not going to advocate for any one exchange, but it could be as simplistic as taking part of that checking account, tying it to your exchange, buying some Bitcoin, and I certainly don't advocate keeping it on exchanges for long periods of time. But in this example that you gave me, that person that may not be as savvy with, they may not look at their balance sheet once a month and update it, they could certainly at least buy a little Bitcoin, keep it on exchange for a short period of time, and then when they were to use it, when they were to need it, they could liquidate it back into cash if it was needed. The whole idea of this too, the longer you can hold on to this thing, the more it's going to appreciate in terms of that purchasing power. A completely separate side of that conversation is, how do I utilize Bitcoin within my business and never sell it? That probably wouldn't work in the case that you just gave me, where that contractor really he's needing that next gig to make payroll, right? And he's moving from gig to gig doing that. It can absolutely still help that person, but just in a slightly different way.
Yeah. So one of my hot buttons that we talk about all the time on this podcast and any conversation I ever have individually is really getting yourself organized financially. I call it a financial structure, infrastructure. If you don't have a strong financial infrastructure, it's really hard for you to grow your business. It's hard for you to execute contracts. I mean, how do you know if customer A that you really like working for has the same profit margin that you anticipate when you bid? Or how about customer B, who you don't like? Are you making more money there? Or what if you add customer C? What's that going to do to your profit margins? And, understanding the financial infrastructure is not that hard. It's if you're not comfortable with finances, it can seem hard. But once it's set up, it's very easy to run, actually. This bookkeeper or controller can run your transactions once you have an accountant set it up. So one of the things we always talk about is an accountant is not just to fill out your taxes. And in the construction world, which is a very complex business, more complex systematically, regardless if you're $1 million business or a $50 million business, there are $150 million businesses that are the most simple financial structures on the planet Earth. Mobilization funding happens to be one of them. I think we don't have inventory. I don't have tons of cost of goods sold. I don't have freight coming in from 5 different vendors that I'm waiting to put this finished good. But a construction company has all of that.
All of that and more.
And more per project. They have insurance risks. There's so much complexity in a financial complexity inside even the smallest revenue construction business. So most of our customers are all commercial contractors. A lot of our guests in our network here are probably commercial contractors, and maybe they're between $2 and $50 million. The key thing, and the reason I bring this up, is working with your accountant to set up that financial infrastructure is so critical, because once you can understand that and now you can say, okay, let me allocate a few percentage points of my margin on each project as I earn it towards Bitcoin. And now you can start to see how these complexity, financial engineering, like they think these gurus can utilize these tools to help enhance their business, and you wish you were smart enough to do that, or you wish you were one of those folks. Like all those things we tell ourselves that just aren't quite untrue, are not true. Yeah. Just be one of those folks that goes to your accountant to set up the financial infrastructure. Just be one of those folks that hires a controller to talk to your accountant to make sure they code everything. And then use your bank account. Let your controller code it all. And then you could sit here and listen to something like this and know where you can pull those dollars from.
I totally agree. And as you've seen, I'm sure, my father's a CPA and my wife is a CPA. So I had balance sheets, cash flow statements, P&Ls, beat into my head from an early age. And I have seen brilliant entrepreneurs who did not choose to focus on that side of the business who didn't make it. And I've also seen marginal players who have done very well who chose to focus on that side of the business. So I totally agree.
In construction, somebody says, well, I got a buddy who had this business, it wasn't in construction. They sold it for however many millions of dollars, and they never did any of that. Okay, well, that first thing I would say is, what were their margins? They're probably in a very high margin business. Oh yeah, they did. They had software business.
Yeah.
Great. Because once you invest in the software, the rest of it's pretty much just add customers and that revenue, your sunk cost in there.
Yeah. In
a business that's lower margin, right, and like a construction world, no one's in here working off 50+% margins, not even close, right?
Sure.
And so you have to be even more organized financially to be successful. In a complex financial business like we just talked about, you have to be even more organized to be successful. And so that's why
Totally agree.
we focus so much on that. And then if you do those things, which aren't that hard to do, literally meet with an accountant, let them set up your financial structure, hire a bookkeeper or controller, let them code the GL transactions the way the accountant said, send them to them once a month, pay a monthly fee to have them run your books for you. You get your report card at the end of it every month. And by the way, doing your taxes is going to be 17,000 times easier.
Right.
Just do that. And then you can actually utilize some of these tools. You'll actually be able to get lines of credit. You'll be able to use other loan products instead of having to just suffer. And so those are some of the things I really wanted to focus on as we talk about this too, because in order to be able to take advantage of this, you can't just take 5% of your deposits every month and park them into Bitcoin and say, oh, I have a 20% margin that I bid, and I'm going to just do that, because then you could get yourself in some real trouble too, especially in a high volatile asset. And that's why someone that I want to make sure I focused on that. Someone hears this and says, oh, I did what you guys said, but then I got my butt kicked because I was on the wrong end of the downslide or the upswing. And when do I sell it? When don't I? You want to be taking 5% of your profit earned
100%.
and doing what we're talking about and letting time work for you.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And if you will do that too, Scott, it truly is a snowball effect. I mean, I absolutely have businesses who have taken that strategy, taken small, they will take, 5 to 10% of their profit, they will put it into Bitcoin. As that appreciates over time, then they will utilize that Bitcoin to get lines of credit, right? And once again, using leverage very conservatively, it opens up avenues that you would never have before. So I totally agree with everything you just said.
So I want to ask you a question that maybe not related to construction, but I'm curious about it from a Bitcoin perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So Wall Street getting involved, right? Creating these derivative products, creating ETFs, there's a lot more access to it. And the ability for more people to purchase or sell Bitcoin, the adoption curve is a huge catalyst to Bitcoin going up.
Mm-hmm.
That said, there's also a lot of financial engineering that can be done with these products that they, like stocks, like they do with stocks, that can, for no fundamental reason, move them up or down. How is Bitcoin, or is Bitcoin, protected against that?
Phenomenal question. So I have always been more into real estate as opposed to securities and equities for that reason. I could control real estate, but I couldn't control what a market maker or what a CEO was or a board was going to do within an equity that I had no real idea of what was going on. Bitcoin is a commodity with a fixed supply. So a lot of the games that have been able to be played in Wall Street, and I'm not villainizing Wall Street whatsoever, it's created a lot of wealth. Yeah. I use it in a variety of ways. But you cannot do the same things that you can within traditional securities with a fixed supply asset, especially over time as this thing grows. Now, you could look at these ETFs in their infancy, which we absolutely are right now. And there's been a lot of volatility within the last 6 months. They all came out in January. We go from 40,000 to 73,000 to 60,000 to 71,000 to 60,000. And so people are like, wait a minute, Wall Street's involved now. All the big money's here. Why is this volatility still here? I'll give one of my favorite examples. There are only 3 people on the planet that have ever not sold their Amazon stock from when it first came out. And that was Jeff Bezos and his parents, right? You've got to understand, to live through this volatility, it's like the baptism by fire. You are going to buy Bitcoin and it is going to go down. But it will appreciate over time, simply because if no one else ever adopted Bitcoin again, Scott, it is going to appreciate over time, because the other side, once again, of that asset pair is going down over time. The dollar is going down over time, right. Okay? So to simply answer your question, the fixed supply part of that is such a special component to Bitcoin that takes a lot of those games. You just can't play them.
Right. That's interesting.
Now, you can wrap them in derivatives and do some different things, but we're not so much talking about. And the ETF is a derivative of Bitcoin, but still, it has to hold pure form 1-to-1.
And I think that's the key piece.
Yep.
If that were to be bifurcated for some way, then you'd see kind of what happened when the dollar was taken off of the gold standard.
Absolutely correct.
And that's what happens. Then you just let humans work their dumbness, and then here we are.
That's exactly right. And if you'll look in 1971 when that happened, look at the debt issuance from 1971. What I'll always encourage people to do too, you always hear, how did people ever survive off of one income? When did that change? If you go back and Google some charts of the M2 money supply and how monetary policy changed from 1971 on, when we broke the gold standard, in my opinion, that is when we started to have all of these issues with the money supply and the money system.
I agree. The old Bretton Woods.
Bretton Woods.
So, what have we, looking at our time here, what have we not focused on that we should for the construction world, the small business world, folks out there? What other things do we need to talk about as it relates to Bitcoin and the technologies around it that folks need to be smart on?
And it's a great question. Let's stick to some simple math. The simple math of where we are is we have a debt to GDP close to 130%. What does that mean? That means the money that we're bringing in as a country, we are spending 130% of that to what our debt is. We are spending more money to service our debt than we are on national defense. Okay? Once you get past 77%, it is mathematically impossible that we can ever pay that back. And so really where we are, and I'm not a doomsday prepper by any means. I think we use information and we use math to make informative decisions going forward. If we know that going forward, we know that our money, they basically have two levers left to pull. They can increase taxes on us or they can print more money, because I don't think any of us believe that these politicians are going to cut away a lot of these programs that we have that lead to all of these issues, right? So if we know that our money is going to devalue over time, it is mathematically certain, and we know that they are going to increase taxes over time because they truly don't have a choice. I think what we all need to focus on is how do we protect ourselves against that debasement? And I keep beating that. The more you understand this thing, the more comfortable you are in it, the more you start to see that I truly think that once you understand what Bitcoin is, you almost see finance in 3D. It opens your mind up to a variety of other things and how other things work and interact with each other. And so I would encourage everyone, do as much education as you can on this thing. There are so many great books. There's so much free literature out there. So for anyone to say they don't really have time, instead of watching a Netflix show, take an hour or two a week even. You're going to work 40 hours a week, highly likely for a majority of your life. Spend 100 of them to understand what money is, and if I could just make some simple changes in my own finance, either personally or in my business, what can that look like in a 10-year period of time?
Yeah.
We're not trying to get rich quick here.
Yeah.
I'm trying to not go poor slowly.
Right, and keep the money you have buying power.
That's exactly right.
Tell me, you mentioned getting smart and educated. I'm a huge fan of that. So, in your opinion, who are 2 or 3 people to pay attention to?
No question in my mind. I would push everyone to a website called hope.com, www.hope.com. And that is, you're going to find a variety of phenomenal types of information on there. It's from Michael Saylor. He has podcasts. There are book recommendations. There are videos. So however you learn best. If you're a podcast guy, you're at the gym listening to them, there's 1,000 of them. If you like watching videos, if you like reading books. But hope.com has a variety of great information on it. I would recommend Michael Saylor. I would recommend Lawrence Lepard. I would recommend, there's a Tampa guy, Gary Cardone, huge Bitcoiner, and he's a real estate guy transitioning into Bitcoin. Phenomenal information from him as well.
Gary Cardone?
Gary Cardone. You've got, if you love to read, the book that I always recommend to everyone is called The Bitcoin Standard. And the author is 𝗗𝗶𝗄𝗆𝗆𝗆𝗄𝗆. You've got great books out there. There's a book called Broken Money by Lynn Alden. Phenomenal. And so there's all of these, however you like to take in your information, whether it's reading it, watching it, listening to it. If you go to hope.com, you're going to find something there that's going to get you started.
Yeah, and Michael Saylor is, for those of you that don't know, Michael Saylor is the CEO of MicroStrategy.
That's
who's
right.
Bought hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of Bitcoin. Billions at this point, yeah, depending on when he bought them.
Yeah.
And the accumulation of it, but also is taking the heat taking the stress, but one thing I like about him a lot is he does explain it in a great way. He's smart and he's disciplined and he's stayed true to his, regardless of the ups and downs. He's taken an absolute beating many ways, and he stays true to it.
If you are a student of business and you want to geek out in business and a balance sheet, if you study what MicroStrategy has done on their balance sheet simply by utilizing Bitcoin on it, it is something that will be taught in universities for years to come. It is a finance marvel of what he has done. So if you really want to take the next step, study what MicroStrategy has done on their balance sheet starting in 2020, and it is truly awe-inspiring.
Yeah, talk about tip of the spear.
Yeah.
All right, so a couple quick questions for you. We like to ask, what is the best advice you've ever received?
The best advice I've ever received, I don't even have to think about it. My wife, who's brilliant in a variety of ways, says, be a student, not a critic.
I love that.
Be a student, not a critic, and you can apply that to almost anything.
Yeah, one of our core values is be humble, and underneath that is be a lifetime learner, and it's premised on the same exact thing. It's easy to shoot holes, talk a bunch of junk, but at the end of the day, if you're learning and serving, you're going to end up better off.
I totally agree.
Yeah, I love that. What's your favorite business-related book?
It would be The Bitcoin Standard by Saifedean Ammous. And once again, because I feel like if you understand the history of money, what we're all spending all of our time and energy chasing after, you understand how it has changed and the base layer of it. I mean, it just makes everything else we're doing every day so much easier.
And what's the most underrated skill in your industry, you think?
Kindness and humility.
Yeah, humility is definitely there, which is kindness, right? Kindness is the premise of that.
For sure, kindness and humility.
That. So I've listened to the podcast now. I'm like, you know what? I like this guy. He seems like he's making sense. How does someone find you?
Yeah, you can email me. I'm not huge on social media, but I am on X, Twitter, whatever they're still calling it, and we can put that in the footnotes. It's Eric Moorman 21M, or you can email me at e5moorman@gmail.com. I would be happy to answer anybody's question. My whole goal in life at this point is I want to reach one person at a time. And whether you're a business owner, a single mother, somebody off the street, if you have a question about Bitcoin and your specific individual situation, reach out to me and I'd be more than happy to help.
Well, I love it, man. Well, I know you're going to help some people today. I know a lot of people have heard this, will hear this. I think it's a great, interesting spin on Bitcoin. When the idea was brought to me, I thought it would be cool to share with everybody. So I hope everyone enjoyed it. I think it's a good crash course, in my opinion, but yet very effective, and you're great at explaining it. I will give you a lot of props for that. That's not an easy thing to do. You're very systematic and organized in what... I wish I heard you first prior to going down my own journey. It would probably save me a lot of time because you've condensed it in a good way, so I appreciate that a lot, and thank you very much, man.
I appreciate you having me.
Folks, I hope you liked this. If you did, please share the episode. Let folks know where they can get this information, all the other guests on our podcast. If there's anything you need, any other suggestions, please leave them in the comments and notes. Questions for Eric, leave in the comments and notes. And, of course, we'll put ways to contact Eric here. You can catch him right in the show notes. Until next time, I wish you the best, and God bless you.